guys, how are you doing? Sean McMahon here. I'm joining you on live stream to spitball a little bit because I've been thinking. And when I think, I often need to think out loud. And I hope that there's some people who are going to join me today and, you know, chime in. I am thinking a lot about the Spotify problem. I've been thinking about the Spotify problem and solutions to it. And honestly, I'm a bit stumped about solutions. So, if you're just joining me for the first time, I'm an independent musician. My name's Sean McMahon. I've been a professional full time musician for 10 years and mostly full time for nearly 15, with odd jobs here and there. I went full time when my wife and I found out we were pregnant with our first baby, and we decided, well, the coffee shop job I had at that time, that could become sort of our crutch of security. And if we had that baby and we had that crutch of security, it might be too scary to let go of that crutch once we're taking care of a little one. So we decided as soon as we found out we were pregnant, we decided that was the time to quit that job and to go full time into music to establish a stable music career, that would provide the security that we could welcome our first baby into, and then things wouldn't be scary and wouldn't be changing careers once we had a baby around. So that's the approach we took. I went full time, living on Martha's Vineyard. I went into dive bar cover band scene. I went into private gigs, and God answered my prayers. I asked God, could you get me a licensing deal? And God gave me a licensing deal. I got a licensing deal with the Music Playground, boutique licensing company out of New York City. Even though I hadn't lived in New York for about, um, man, maybe 5 years at that point. And I guess this ties into the Spotify problem because I suspect what piqued the Music Playground's interest in my music was that right around that time, I was having a viral moment on Spotify. And I'll walk you through that because it's interesting. And it's going to be a word of encouragement towards people who are trying to, make it in Spotify and things like that. So in 2017, one of my songs inexplicably went organically viral. It was the song No, It's Not. That's the title of the song, No, It's Not. Uh, and the reason I say organically viral is to make an important distinction. I didn't hire any playlisters. I've never signed my music up for any sort of help with playlists before. And remind me to get to that because I've been accused of that by Spotify. Maybe we'll get to that. But anyway, No, It's Not started having this uptick. I went from probably double digits monthly listeners, possibly triple digits monthly listeners, to quintuple digits. I think it maxed out at around 60,000 monthly listeners in the summer of 2017. It was all listeners to the song No, It's Not. And I had a good friend in Northampton, Mass, named Kara Karma, who runs Priya Marketing, music marketing. And she dug into my analytics and she discovered that it's what is called organic uh, viral traffic. People were just listening to it. They weren't being driven to it by social media. I wasn't promoting the song. And eventually we figured out that it came from a Redditor named like Gallo Booby or something, Gallo Boob. Rest in peace, Charlie Kirk. I know, I know. I want to talk about that too, but I'm going to focus on the music business for this live stream, and I might go live and talk about Charlie. But what happened is awful, and we need to pray for neighborly love in this country. Um, we'll get back to that. So yeah, No, It's Not went viral, and that brought in the most money I'd ever seen from Spotify in the, I think at that point, 3 years that I was on Spotify. And so here is why this is an encouraging story because No, It's Not was part of an EP called the Lamb EP. I released that in 2014. I was a New Yorker at the time. I did a release show. I did a PR campaign where I, hired my friend Lauren Piper to send out physical PR copy to different blogs. At the time, blogs were like the big thing. And there were some blog write-ups, and I discovered something that a lot of 2010s indie artists discovered was that blog write-ups weren't really leading to listening conversion anymore. I made some sales on Bandcamp, but I was encouraged by my friend Dave Gibson from Streets of Laredo to go on Spotify and use a DSP to put everything up on the streaming platforms, because his band Streets of Laredo, in which I was the touring bass player, they did that, and their stuff went viral, and they had a great marketing plan because Dave Gibson is a genius. He now works with C3 Management. Um, but as much as he tried to help me, the Lamb EP didn't really catch. I got some great write-ups, but I didn't get a lot of listenership really. This was 2014. So fast forward to 2017, one song that is 3 years old. I didn't re-release it or anything. It was sitting there for 3 years. It started going viral, thanks to a redditor named Gallo Boob, and that's how that happened. And so I maxed out around 60,000 monthly listeners, and I enjoyed a decent amount of steady listenership for maybe a couple years. And around that time, I got offered a licensing deal by the Music Playground on the strength of that song, and got a sync. I Want to Be With You from my 2018 Pass It Round EP was synced with a Subaru ad in 2020. So that's how we got through 2020 because I wasn't working anymore. Okay, that's the story. That's all to say. That's how I make my living as a live musician in the tourist economy of Martha's Vineyard, and occasionally, if I'm lucky, a licensing sync. That's how I bring in most of my money. When No It's Not went viral, you know, it's got like 1.5, maybe 1.6 million streams now. Um, Last time I checked my DistroKid balance, I think I've made around $9,000 total in the past 10 years since I've been on the streaming platforms. That is not a living income. I'm proud of it. I think anyone who makes that money should be proud. Man, if you make $100 a year, you should be proud because that's real listenership, but the money is a problem, right? So the Spotify problem, um, you know, you don't get paid really well for Spotify streams. The reason I've been able to rationalize and justify being on these platforms is because I can conceptualize of Spotify as paid marketing. So there is an algorithm. The music does get out to people. Like the algorithm is sifting through your music and it is presenting it to people. It's sort of up to them, up to the listener if they're going to keep listening to it. But this is sort of just like I try to look at it as like a high quality radio service um, that actually pays you because traditionally you pay a lot of money to get your money on the radio and to get it in front of listeners. So Spotify allows you to get paid to do that, and that's cool. But there are other problems with Spotify. And they're ethical problems for a lot of people. A lot of people are making a lot about Daniel X investments. Daniel Ek is the CEO of Spotify. His investments in military weapons development and all that stuff. And of course, people are wondering if the compensation is fair. Taylor Swift infamously had a problem with it. Um, the reason Spotify doesn't pay people like you and me very well, as I understand it, is in order to play and make available the music of the big guns, people like Taylor Swift or people like I don't know who's going to come to mind. This is my Rorschach test of the type of musician I am. Aerosmith, Limp Bizkit, Korn, Silverchair, and those, right? That's what comes to mind. Um, in order to make that music available on Spotify, Spotify has to they have to buy the licensing basically to do that from the major labels that own those bands, and they do own those bands. Um, so they cut a deal, and so far as I know, I don't know how transparent it is now, but last I checked, it wasn't very transparent. But those major labels are getting quite a lot of that streaming money that is being brought in by Spotify listenership. This applies to all the streaming platforms. And the artists on those major labels are kind of like us. They're not getting paid that well. So a lot of Spotify's money is being tied up with the business heads, paying for the overhead cost. This not just the CEOs, but they just take all that money and pay whoever with it, and they just don't pay the artists that much. So I don't know what the figures are, but that's how it works. Those major labels have the leverage. They say you can't play the big artist that most people are going to be listening to unless you give us the lion's share, and that's how we get the crumbs. And the crumbs like are calculated differently according to the algorithm, and you don't really know exactly what you're going to get per stream. If you go into your breakdown by song um, or by stream, you're going to see all sorts of different numbers. It's basically $0.003 now, but it's actually quite variable. So that's the pay structure. It is what it is. Let's talk about you know getting your music booted. So I believe the song Sound of Freedom that my wife and I co wrote and co produced, we put that song out last year, maybe the year before. And it's like this beautiful kind of dance pop Christian tune. And somehow we got notified by Spotify, or perhaps DistroKid. No, DistroKid. My distributor notified me that Spotify flagged it for bot streams, and said, you shouldn't use these playlisting services because some of them aren't on the up and up, and we here at DistroKid can't do anything. This was Spotify's call. Your song's been taken down. And so I talked to DistroKid. They said talk to Spotify. I tried to talk to Spotify. I talked to a bot and then maybe an agent. And the agent promptly just told me, "Buzz off. We make the calls around here, and there's nothing you can do about it, but potentially re-upload the song," which we did, and it was fine. I said earlier in the video, I've never used a playlisting service. It's just not worth my money to invest hundreds of dollars on a risk, on a gamble that maybe you'll get the listenership that they claim they'll get you, but you also might get booted for using these services. So I've never used them, and I still got booted, a song booted under the allegation that I was using those services when I wasn't. Weird. And I just got notified through DistroKid that a couple of other songs are under suspicion of that type of playlisting bot services. And I assure you, not only am I not using them, but the songs that they're talking about, like full disclosure, they're not really being listened to. So that's what's crazy. Um, don't ask me what's going on there, but that's the type of issue you run into when you are an independent musician using a middleman distributor to have your music distributed on the streaming platforms. You don't have a lot of control. Um, Now, me as an independent musician, I like to have control. I've been offered record deals before, and I've turned them down because you realize that what they're offering you is is not that much, frankly. Even if they're offering you an advance, which they should, but not all do. But an advance is basically a loan, and you can get better repayment terms from a bank than you would in a record deal. A classic example that I'm aware of is the Goo Goo Dolls. I don't want the world to see me, 'cause I don't think that they'd understand. That band, before that hit came out, they were in record label limbo. They came out of like the late '80s hair band scene, and they were rocking and rolling, sort of punky, and they discovered Johnny Resnick's knack for balladry, and they had a couple hits. But somewhere along the lines, their record label, I think Warner Brothers, they decided that Goo Goo Dolls wasn't selling well enough, and I think the story goes that Goo Goo Dolls worked on their follow-up album, probably to A Boy Named Goo, and the label was like, "Nah, we don't like it, and we're not going to give you more money to record another one." And the boys were like, "All right, well, maybe it's time for Johnny to do like a solo record, and we'll all work on that together, but under Johnny's name." No, can't do it. You cannot, under the terms of this deal, Goo Goo Dolls, go off and break off into solo projects. You belong to us. And this has happened to other bands. It happens a lot. You sign a contract. the label can decide not to put out your song. You're still on the line to pay back the money that you had to use for certain producers. Sometimes producers they tell you to use. Um, Even sometimes they're telling you how to do the music, and then they hear it and they're like, we don't like it anyway. We don't like this. And then they won't let you release the album. You're still on the line to pay it back, and they won't let you work on another one. And they won't let you break off and do your own thing. It's pretty wacky. I mean, those are somewhat extreme cases, but at the same time, they're not uncommon. So, you know, I'm sure there are great labels out there. I'm aware that people are relatively fond of 30 Tigers. I thought they seemed very cool. I got keyed into 30 Tigers because Charlie Crockett worked with them, and I love Charlie Crockett, and I respect his ethos. But Charlie Crockett didn't have the best things to say about 30 Tigers in the end. Just similar issues, money type stuff. Not huge complaints. Just he realized it behooved him to be fully independent in a lot of ways, and I believe what he ended up doing is he signed a distribution deal with a company that was willing to give him a lot of control. And that's, I'm pretty sure, like what Willie Nelson did too. Like a lot of these guys end up basically signing deals that, in all but name, is the artist contracting with the record label to work for them rather than the artist working for the record label. So that's the background of how all this stuff works and why, I tend to lean towards wanting to be independent, and why I think musicians in general crave independence because we're creatives, and it's hard to be creative without a certain element of control over your creations. And platforms like the one we're on now allow us to literally just create, like I'm creating right now. I'm talking, but it's a piece of content we're creating. It's not too hard to create and distribute your music, or your podcast or whatever. So my mindset is that it really does behoove us, if we want to be independent, to be fully independent. Which brings me to the Spotify problem. Um, these these streaming platforms, they're not that lucrative, and I would like them to be. Now I'm in a decent position where I make most of my living from live music, and so I can always fall back on that. And I think ultimately that's sort of always going to be the most valuable thing. Reality, like the physical person in the physical space, physically creating the music for a physical audience that physically wants to be there and physically paid to be there, and is choosing to engage with you and value you, and vice versa. I choose to be present with you, and I'm putting in the work to do it, and all that value exchange. Um, this is the long version of a short I put out. I don't. I'm racking my brain for solutions to the Spotify problem, and one path I've tried is just pulling all of my music off of Spotify. I've done that. I've also pulled all but the top streaming songs off of the streamers, and in all of the platforms that allow me to have like a profile or an about me section, I say, hey, this is some of my music. If you like it, there's more on Bandcamp. Here's my Venmo for tipping, before they put tipping options in some of these platforms. Did it work? Marginally, but not that well. Like, I had thousands of listeners on Spotify, but I couldn't drive thousands of listeners to that link. I have thousands of Instagram followers, but anyone who does this game, we know that conversion is difficult. You can have thousands of followers, but you're only really going to have, for every thousand, maybe 1 to 10 diehards who will actually click the links and care about the song that you're playing on your post. Um, what else did I do? I also tried doing a voiceover on some of my top streaming songs. So I like re-uploaded my top streaming songs with a voiceover that said, "Hey, thanks for listening. If you're into this, please consider buying the album on Bandcamp, and sharing it with your friends," type of thing. And in my mind, I was hearkening back to the days where you would go to an online music store, and all you had for an album was like maybe a couple snippets of a handful of songs. Or in early days of Amazon Music, you could stream maybe like 5 to 10 seconds of every song. I remember the first album I tried to buy online was Sean Lennon's Into the Sun, and you could listen to a snippet of like 2 songs. And that's what sold me on the album. And I didn't have a bank card at the time, and my dad wasn't around, so I had no one to ask to put in the order for me. I was a kid. And so I just waited until the weekend and went to the record store and bought Sean Lennon's record. I know it's different now. Um, you know, frankly, even the boomer generation, when they come to my shows, they're like, they joke, we don't buy CDs anymore either because there's no CD players in most of their cars, all that stuff. I've never produced vinyl, just I never felt there's enough demand for it because I knew a lot of, I had a lot of friends in New York at the height, in my perception, at the height of like the vinyl resurgence. And their labels would pay for vinyl or they would do it themselves independently, but they all still just have piles of these records lying around that they can't sell. Um, this is like the reality of being an independent musician, if you're not like super wildly popular and touring all the time. So me, I've scaled my music business to a small business model, and so I keep low overhead, and I don't invest in vinyl because I'm playing locally in a tourist economy, and not all those people are like bona fide, I love music so much I'm going to buy vinyl people. I've definitely had people ask me about it, but not enough to justify it, right? Uh, so I guess where this is going is those people who are there, they do want to know where my Spotify is. That is the biggest query. We love your music. What's your Instagram? What's your Spotify? And I can't really shake that. I can't deny that that's the highest demand on me as an independent musician. Where is your Spotify? That's where people want to listen. Um, how do I feel about this? Not great. And if you've been watching this whole video, you might wonder why, because I had some decent things to say about Spotify. Yeah, it's just not ideal. It's just not ideal. When I daydream and fantasize about taking full control of my recording career, here's a couple of ideas. I'm just gonna throw some stuff at the wall, and you can think about it too if you're an independent musician, and if you're a listener, I'd love your feedback. But what I find is I'm interacting the most with my fans on Instagram. That's where they message me. And so I've leaned into that. I'm posting more shorts of songs. And I think that's a good way to get people acquainted with your music. And then the ones that want to listen on Spotify, they will. I have struggled to get them to go to Bandcamp. When I pulled all of my music off of Spotify, I make some sales on Bandcamp, but I reckon most people are just listening to it for free on Bandcamp, streaming it as many times as they can before Bandcamp says, "Hey, you got to pay for it now." I think you can listen to an album 3 times in like the space of a day or two before they say, "Hey, you got to pay for it." So actually, Spotify has the advantage there, right? Because at least you're getting paid something for every stream. Bandcamp can't offer that to an artist. Uh, the other complaint I've gotten about about Bandcamp, is that if you're on your phone and you don't have the Bandcamp app and you try to download an album on Bandcamp, you can't. You can't actually download a Bandcamp album onto your phone without the app. So you have to get the app, and maybe the app's improved, but I've heard complaints about the app. It's a little esoteric. And people complain, "Oh, well, I like your music and I want to be able to put it into a playlist, and all my playlists are on Spotify." Well, there is a way to take song files that are on your phone offline and load them into a folder in your phone that's part of the Spotify app folder. And then in Spotify, you can manually add those songs into your playlist. I made videos about it. Um, I mean, who's going to actually want to do that unless they're a diehard fan, right? So, that's the reality. You're asking a lot of your fans if you're trying to drive them into just clunkier interfaces and platforms, when the fact of the matter is music fans do congregate in Spotify. But another solution I've thought of has to do with the fact that music fans do congregate on YouTube. Um, I am a person who has discovered pretty much all of my favorite bands for the past 5 to 10 years on YouTube. And so one solution I've thought of is, you build up your YouTube channel and put out your singles on YouTube, and then make the albums available for members only on YouTube, because there's membership tiers now in YouTube. I'm not at that tier yet, but it's a possibility. Let's see. I need I need some advice. Earlier today, my friend asked me, would I rather watch a tree grow or a Negro? Wow, I love where your mind is at and how enlightened and enlightening you are. Thanks for joining me, Ray McCree. Um, which of us is feigning ignorance here? Grow up, kiddo. Okay, so let's see. That's solution one. Like, let's get into solutions. So, a band like King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, who I played with at Boston Calling a couple years ago, they've got like the diehard fans who are following them through the most esoteric of album cycles, right? They are the perfect band to be able to walk away from the common marketplace of Spotify and just say, follow us to this other platform. Um, do I wish that they could spearhead a movement where everyone would do that? All music fans in general would follow them to Bandcamp and be a part of that ecosystem? Yes, but is that realistic? Not really. So yeah, I suspect, something I'm daydreaming about is maybe just taking all but my singles, my most well-performing singles, off of the streaming platform. So having like my top 10 songs on Spotify, let those keep bringing me in money. Trust God that a handful of those people are going to become big fans, because none of the messaging I'm giving on Spotify is going to drive most of those people beyond the song that they want to hear on their playlist, and they might not never even visit my profile. So let that be good. Like, that's a good thing. So keep that there. But um, maybe you just gotta start a club, man, for the people who care about the rest of the stuff. A membership tier on Spotify allows people to stream music still in a easy to reach, convenient area. But the membership wall around it brings in some compensation for you, um, without having to bring in the clunkiness of another app like the Bandcamp app, unfortunately. That's an approach, right? And then you can keep using shorts and snippets of songs or full songs on YouTube and Instagram to create awareness about your song and about your work. Um, but again, a YouTube membership is going to at least keep it in a place that most people are already hanging out in, right? Because you don't have to get another app, you don't have to do other stuff. Um, the other option I've thought about, and I've never pulled the trigger on this, and I don't suspect I ever will, but the other option is just, I'm off and I'm only going for physical media, and I'm only going to bother trying to sell physical media as a point to make a giant statement. That seems like Neil Young territory. I'm not going to do that anytime soon. A lot of things would have to change for me to take that approach, but nah. Um, the other option is like join a union, just start fighting Spotify for better compensation. But anyone who knows anything about the history of unions, there's just this whole escalation issue of the unions advocating. There's the political alliances that happen, and then yes, you get your wage hikes, but then things become much more exclusive to the union. I mean, like, venues, music venues are usually union workers. I guarantee you the music labels have union people there, and it's part of why it's so exclusive. It's no different than a guild. Old guild culture, it was very strict, and there was a lot of trust in order to get into a guild. And if you weren't in the guild, then you didn't have a career. Um, so any student of economics will know that that is probably going to lead to more exclusivity. If Spotify or whoever agrees to raise the rates, I guarantee you they're going to stop taking the music of the lowlings like you and me, because it's not going to be worth their time. If they have to pay people with just a couple thousand even 10,000, even 1 million monthly listeners, they have to pay them, I don't know, a buck a stream or whatever people want. They're not going to do it. They're just going to say, well, let's just stick with Taylor Swift then, right? That's what I suspect will happen. Um, Another interesting solution, uh, it's sort of tangential, but I was watching Top Music Attorney's channel, and she's talking about all the litigation and class action lawsuits against AI companies that are basically taking musicians' work without permission and machine learning it, and then spitting out facsimiles of what they learned from those musicians without permission for other people, creators. So there's a platform, I forget what she called it, but there's an AI platform for musicians where basically a musician can opt in and say, here's my music, I give you permission to machine learn from it, and people can use that information however they want to generate their own AI music, uh, but they get compensated for it. So I can give this company permission to use my music, and I'll get compensated algorithmically, however the AI machine wants to use the content information I gave them. That's going to bring in like a whole layer of infrastructure, probably blockchain accounting, that is going to be amazing, and it's going to happen. It's necessary, but boy, is it going to be invasive, and boy, is privacy going to become like a major issue in this world. Because frankly, as you know, with Facebook and things like that, they profit off of all of the content we give to them, and we don't get a cent for it. So, Facebook is rich because we're the ones providing the content. Um, this is like an issue that the right and left wings in America are uniquely united on. Like, I'm pretty sure, like, um, Trump and AOC basically agree that individual content contributors to these platforms should be compensated for what they're doing. We're basically on social media. We're like freelance contributors to like a number of newspaper publications, if you want to think of it that way, and we're not getting paid. Um, we opted in. If we're using the platforms, we basically opted in. But there's a larger question of whether this is ethical, and if it's not ethical, is it illegal, or should it become illegal? So that's the debate of our times. And I think what's probably going to happen is there's going to be just the advent of the mega blockchain, and everyone's content, information, transactions are going to be on the line to potentially be monitored. Hopefully, you have a choice to opt in, um, and hopefully, it'll be compensated. But when you opt in, you're saying, sure, monitor all my information. You can use it. You can machine learn from it. You can create derivative works from it, so long as I'm compensated. But again, in order to get that compensation, it's going to be like mega surveillance. So I think that's like the pragmatic tech technological solution that's like already in the pipeline, and whoever wins the war, the tech war, will be in charge of that. It might become a public utility, is what I sort of suspect in the end, like telephones. But yeah, that's another solution. But yeah, live music is sort of where it's at. I'm gonna sit down and start experimenting more with live stream concerts. Back in 2020, that worked well for my wife and I. We were early adopters. We live streamed directly into a private Facebook group for like Martha's Vineyard. A lot of towns, have their own dedicated Facebook groups, and that was a good thing. We knew who we were streaming to. We knew it was the people who wanted to come to our shows, but they couldn't because of the pandemic. And in the early days, I think sometimes we'd take home about like 400, 500 a night for 2 to 3 hours of streaming. Um, People were generous. And then, of course, the pandemic wore on, and people were like, why is this still happening? And, you know, tuning into live streams became weirdly depressing because it just reminded us that this was going on way too long. So yeah, I'm going to look into that. And I know that that's sort of a tried and tested model for lots of people. Um, but I guess live music for me, I just know it's what works. It's been my primary bread and butter. My music career has been the reason I've always, pretty much always, offered my Christian ministry without any cost. Like I don't charge for anything, and I'm not enough of a scholar that I can like paywall an essay because it's not specialized enough. I'm just doing Bible studies, right? Um, Workman is worth his wages, but I'm a tent maker like St. Paul. I try to subsidize my ministry with labor so that people don't have to pay for my ministry, so that, so people can support me however they want. Like occasionally I'll get like a super chat, and occasionally people will send me like a little thank you gift. But for the most part, I'm making money as a working musician. Um, the Spotify problem is tied into a larger monocultural issue that's happening. Again, I don't demonize Spotify itself, and I'm not going to demonize Live Nation, but let's talk about Live Nation. In Boston, the word on the street, and I'm not in Boston, so I'm relying, when I say word on the street, I'm talking about like a handful of friends that I have in Boston. I've been told that in the past couple years, local bands are just not able to open for touring bands anymore. When I was in New York, there'd be a touring band coming through, like a fairly big name, and if you knew the talent buyer well enough, and if you had a good relationship with the venue, and they knew that you pulled heads in, you could get that opening slot. I opened for Sean Lennon. I opened for Rubble Bucket. I opened for. I've opened for a lot of people. I opened for Margaret Glaspie, but she was a friend. I opened for John Fogerty. I opened for Kurt Pyle. So, these things were kind of an option, and that was in New York. When I moved to Northampton, Mass, that was a secondary market, and it was a small town. You could kind of be a big fish in a small town, and you could open for some great artists there. Secondary markets are not doing so well right now. Northampton's not doing so hot. Not the bigger names aren't stopping in Northampton anymore. They're not stopping in Worcester as much. This is the Massachusetts Northeast market. The big bands are stopping in Boston, and that's because the big bands work with big touring agencies or booking agencies, and those booking agencies work with Live Nation, and Live Nation is only going to work with those booking agencies, and Live Nation controls a lot of the venues in Boston. There are plenty of bars like Sally O'Brien's and Plow and Stars. Like any band can still play in Boston if they want to, but to open for a bigger band, I guess it's harder because Live Nation is only contracting with these bigger agencies in order to get these bigger bands, and the bigger bands will bring in their own openers because they're vetted and it's fail safe, right? It's just safer, less risk. If you want to play like a bigger Live Nation venue in Boston or any other place, you can as a headliner if you're a local band, but you just got to be able to say like, hey, I will bring the 500 to 1,000 people to this venue. You can count on me. Um, but I've heard that it's a little riskier for the venues because Live Nation's a big company and they want to work with people who have LLCs and who have legal protections and just have a lot of that stuff that a lot of independent musicians aren't necessarily going to have. You know. So, what do you do with that? I call it the black flag method. Black flag used to look at a map and they'd look at New York City, for instance, and then they'd look like 3 hours outside of New York City, 4 hours outside of New York City, and find this place in the map that didn't have any major cities or even secondary markets nearby. And they'd find that town that's just in the middle of that nowhere zone and say, that town is full of the most bored kids who need us. That's the black flag method. You search for a need and then you meet it with your service. And that's how I think of it. So here on Martha's Vineyard, we only have a handful of music venues, but we have lots of farmland, and so people will throw parties on their farms, lots of private events. House shows, man. What I'm getting at is house shows, farmers markets. I'm talking about churches. I'm talking about what else? Like you could go to public schools if you got a message. Like talk to kids, talk to them about how music saved your life. It saved mine, right? Um, find places of need and serve them, because as I was talking with a new friend, this guy Ethan from Connecticut. He's a working musician and he's working at restaurants and bars and he's making his $200 for 2 to 3 hours playing covers, right? And then he meets people and then he plays their houses, he plays their barbecues and stuff. That's how you make a living with live music. Um, and I was encouraging him, like, throw in your original songs because you are the only person who can do that. And so if people like that, then you become that much more valuable. You are the only one playing your original music, and the people who like that become your biggest fans. And then you build your community from there because you are meeting a need. They're hearing a song that they've never heard before, and it's only from you. And so they need you. You can do that. Um, but God, where was I? You can see I'm pounding coffee. I didn't sleep much that night because last night because of yesterday's news. It was very troubling. But where was I going with that? Well, basically, long story short, my father always said, "Create your own venue," and wise words. I mean, he's a paper salesman, and he knows how to sell things to people who don't necessarily know what they want, or they've never heard of your product and whatnot. I mean, you got to think like a salesperson. And if you if you find a place that maybe is underserved by music, chances are they don't like know that that's what they might need. You got to approach them and say, "Hey, like I want to play your town because I I don't see many bands playing there, and I bet you that would be an exciting thing for the teenagers or for the 20 somethings or whatever." Um, it ties into the broader issue of like, I know I'm tangential, but it ties into the broader economic issue of why can't we afford houses in America? Well, you can, but they're in places where there aren't really any jobs, and they're places that have been abandoned. So you can go to like upstate New York, and you're gonna think upstate New York is an expensive place because it's like a yuppie haven. Yeah, sure, like Woodstock might be weirdly expensive, but go further north, you're still going to be able to find a 5 bedroom house for $100,000. But you might have to live old school. You might have to start a small business. You might have to figure out what people need in that community and then figure out how to give it to them. So if you're a musician, you kind of have to think the same way, small business mindset. Like, we know that we love music and so we want to make it our business. But you also have to be real practical and real realistic about what people actually need. Um, because otherwise you're going to run into this problem. You're going to look at your small town and you're not going to see any bands getting famous in your small town. And you're going to say, uh-oh, this sucks. I need to move to New York City. I need to move to Los Angeles. I need to move to Nashville, where traditionally people become famous and successful. It's like, yeah, you could do that, but you're choosing an oversaturated market where there's tons of other versions of you running around. Um, it's a gamble. You can try it and you'll meet lots of people like you, so it's a networking hive, and that's a great idea for that. But also, if you find yourself in a town and there's no one like you, that's a strength. If you can just figure out how being you, um, how offering yourself to people can actually help what they need, um, then you become indispensable, and you create your value in a community. But you have to know what people need. So I'm a fan of the hyper local approach, and I actually believe that the greatest musicians that we look up to, they were associated with a place. Nirvana was associated with Seattle because Seattle had a scene, and they were doing that. Beach Boys came from California. Beatles, Liverpool sound. It catches on and people emulate it, but usually it happened in a place. Chop and screw music coming from Texas. K-pop comes from Korea. So, there's a lot to be said for meeting your community, getting to know them, and then writing for them, doing what you do, like as a creator, for them, because those people are unique and you can actually get to know them. And as you get to know them, you can actually get into a community relationship with them and meet their needs. And those people, like everyone else in the world, are unique. And so you're going to come up with something unique because of that relationship. Um, I always thought it was interesting how a band like Coldplay, for instance, they started off sounding one way, but once they started playing stadiums, their sound evolved to be a stadium sound, which in my mind was a lot more generic and not as exciting personally by my taste. But that happens. Like it's very rare for a band that ascends to the level of playing in these environments, these physical environments that are massive, cavernous, and filled with thousands of people. It's very rare that the band doesn't change what they're playing in order to adapt to that space. It's kind of just a natural thing. I'm talking to a screen, so I'm talking in one way. But if I were talking to a room full of people, my delivery would be different. I'd be thinking differently. I'd be perceiving everyone's feelings. I could feel shifts in the room. I'd be talking different. No different than music. So, you know, hyperlocal approach has its financial benefits, lots of opportunity, and it has a lot of creative benefits because you're going to create something unique. Um, Anyone who plays in a band knows that the chemistry amongst the bandmates uh, lends itself to what you're making and how creative it is and how unique it is. It's a unique chemistry, and you try to play your band's music with another set of musicians. It's just going to feel differently, and you're going to start writing music differently for that other set of musicians. It's the same thing with your audience. You're just going to meet those needs differently. I may have exhausted all of my brain pathways for what I'm talking about here. But I wanted to think out loud because I know this type of thing is valuable for many musicians, and I know that not everyone who's on my channel is here for music. Some of you are here for theology, and I appreciate your patience if that's who you are. Um, but like I said, as a person in ministry, uh, I'm a tent maker. I don't really want to charge for my ministry, and I have a music career, and that's how I can offer ministry for free. So I am very invested in my music career being successful for that reason, and then of course for all the kids that I have that are upstairs right now being homeschooled by mama. Um, yeah, go for it, guys. If you have ideas, drop them in the comments because this is a fascinating and ever evolving subject. And my takeaway from listening to myself talk right now is, man, I'm a luddite or a luddite. Like, left to my own devices, I would move out to Amish country, and avoid some of the more complex ways to approach like music technology and internet stuff. So that just tells me there's probably a lot of possibilities I'm not seeing. So if you see some other things, some other novel approaches, let me know. Put it in your comments. Make a response video, because things are changing at a fast rate in the music industry, especially like recording and content creation online. And we're on the cusp of the next thing. We've exhausted the current things. The current things and platforms have been around for a while. We all remember that Napster was a thing for a hot minute and MySpace was a thing for a hot minute. And then along came LimeWire and all these other options came, and then it was like, oh, what do we choose? What's the central thing? How do we create momentum? You couldn't create momentum with that thing anymore. And then streaming happened and Facebook happened. And we all know that Facebook and streaming are sort of at their sell by date. Something new is coming, and there's another transition ahead of us. So let's put our heads together and figure out how to get through it and what we can do to live abundantly and well. God bless you. Thanks for listening, and